Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Dave Albert. In this show, I talk about technology, building a company as a CTO and co-founder, and have guests to discuss their roles in technology and entrepreneurship. Hey everybody, just me today. I am going to give you a little bit of an update on what we've been working on and some of the things that we've begun to experiment with in improving the development of Meta. So we have a web app that is almost ready for launch. We've built it on Vue.js. It's coming along really nicely. We had an intern come in and, well, actually two interns, but one had some experience in React, but I still thought Vue was a better decision. He spent a lot of the time setting up the foundation of it and also creating multiple components that we would use to build some of the pages. And the components have made it so much easier to quickly build out different elements of the web app. I'm really happy with the way that Vue works. It's amazing. I mean, I think there are definitely some similarities with React, but having the components that you can just stick in as basically like HTML elements, pass in some properties, and then have that reusable component within your page where you need it is extremely nice and allows you to move quite quickly when building out those pages. We're using Azure Serverless Functions as an interface to the API. Also, I think that I may, in some cases, begin to separate out different services, possibly microservices. I don't know that they're small enough to be called that yet, using the serverless. So instead of trying to incorporate the way that we deal with the API from our mobile apps in the web app, which obviously with a web app, all the source is visible to the user. We have this interface with the serverless, and it's working really nicely. Also, you can ship to production. Obviously, it's not something you want to do long term from VS Code. So there's an Azure plugin, and you can create new serverless endpoints. You can ship your updated code to it. Longer term, of course, we'll incorporate it into the build pipeline. But it's really quite nice when you're experimenting and trying to better understand the full implementation of the solution. Sure, you can mock some stuff out and get an idea of if it's going to work, but when you need to make specific changes that are really only visible once you're in production, it's really quite nice. You can also directly log the endpoints from VS Code, so you can see exactly what is being sent and returned and logged, and it's useful in helping to debug while you're initially getting set up. Let's see what else. Oh, so it's built in Vue, but we're actually hosting it from S3. So it's a static site build that is built through our Bitbucket pipeline and then uploaded to S3. And then that was another reason that we needed something like serverless connect to interface to the API currently. I suppose there are some things I could do similar to the way we're handling authentication with the serverless endpoints. I could do the same to the API, but it was going to require quite a bit of additional work to prevent causing issues for the existing mobile applications. We also have started a couple of initiatives, I guess, that might be the word that I'm looking for, to help improve product development. One of them was triggered through the Shape Up book by Ryan Singer of Basecamp. It's a free book that they've put out on how they work, and I would 100% recommend it. Now, they are a much different organization than we are. They have multiple small teams working on different aspects of their product. We have one product team that works on iOS, Android, and the web app. We have currently one UX UI designer. So it's not possible to follow Shape Up exactly, but one of the key elements that we are trying to use of it. Let me take a step back. So, instead of giving the team... Alright, let me take an even further step back. First of all, read the book. I'm probably not going to do it justice, but how it applies to us, and I think is still valuable. Instead of having a massive backlog of tasks that you are never going to get through, it's not possible. No one has completed their backlog, not for a product that is being built today. There's just too many things to build. There are too many possibilities. Sure, we can add a new feature set, a new, update copy, update images, maybe restyle, of course, fix bugs. Those are definitely a thing that you still want to keep track of. But instead of every idea that you have, adding them to a backlog, what they do is they have 6-week cycles where some people are in the process of shaping up work, which is clearly defining the problem, doing research on how a solution might be, a high level of what a solution might be. Whereas how we have worked in the past is once we have a fully designed UI, we then build that basically to spec. And obviously, as anyone who's done that, we've run into some issues. Not having specific questions answered early on because it's not possible until you've actually started some implementation. So that you end up requiring rework both of the design and of development. Hopefully those shrink over time, spending a bit of time with meetings talking about it during prototyping phase and time spent kicking off the development to make sure that all of the unanswered questions get answered. You can minimize that, but it's not perfect. I mean, nothing is perfect, but a lot of the Shapeup book speaks to us in a way that just seems right. So Basecamp have the 6-week cycle. They shape up work. They deliver, they bet on which one of those is the right thing to work on. They've clearly defined the problem. They've identified what the solution can be. They then take that entire scope of work and break it into smaller scopes of work. And then they decide that they have the appetite to work on that set of scopes of work for 6 weeks. So they have variable scope, but a fixed time set, as opposed to having a fixed scope and then, you know how that is. We're going to build X. And then you get into it and there are unknowns. And when those unknowns appear, instead of 1 week or 2 weeks, you're then in 3 or 4 weeks. Because there's just no way to have complete confidence before you begin work on what is involved. And one way that they use, one tool that Basecamp use are what they call hill charts. So it looks very similar to a bell graph. Yeah. You know, like when you were graded in school on a curve. So it looks like a big hill. So the first half is kind of the discovery phase where you're still more clearly understanding elements of each of the scopes. You can drag those up the hill to show the process of where they are, or the phase to completion that they are. As you get to the second side of the hill, that is the downward slope. So you're coming up the hill while you're figuring things out. At the peak, that's once you've finally understood everything, and then coming down the hill is during implementation. And obviously, in the beginning, there's more uncertainty. As you get closer to the end, your certainty increases because the things that are unknown have most likely been discovered. So that's how they are able to figure out which of those scopes of work can be included, can't be included while they're working their 6-week cycle. So what we have started to do is to shape up the work by more clearly defining all of the problems. Often we will, where we have kind of jumped on a solution. So we have a problem. We have what we think is a workable solution, and then try to pare that down into the easiest to deliver. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily give you the best experience. I mean, we always compare it to think, okay, is this a good experience? But that doesn't mean that we are necessarily building the right thing. It's more likely that we're solving the problem in a way, in the best way we can, not solving it in the best way that it can be solved. So that's what we're doing here is making this more about the problem, talking about the solution, but leaving more of it open so that it can be worked on more independently. Some other areas that enable that to happen at the same time so that the design doesn't have to be miles ahead of development is what they call affordances. So you create breadboards. So it's like a step back from a wireframe. You create your breadboard and you have your affordances. So if there's a form, well, we know that we've got to have input fields. So name, email, password. And there are buttons. Login, cancel, forgot password. By hooking up the affordances that you've understood from the breadboard, development can then go and begin those integrations before you've tried to completely design what it's supposed to look like, which may uncover elements that are extremely important to know about, but that you couldn't know about until you've begun your work. Also means that you're not working in multiple in disjointed streams. So design is designing, then they hand over the design, development begins, that begins, and then maybe the API is in development, and then you try to hook it all together at the last minute, and that's where multiple problems can occur. Whereas here, we've completely defined the problem. The API and the mobile apps can be integrated together while design is still completing what the actual UI will look like. So this helps prevent the designer from having to be ahead of development, which is never, at least with our team having only one designer, there's no way that he can stay ahead and also not waste effort by working on a thing that we end up putting on a back burner. This way, spending more time defining the problem, defining the elements that will be required before having the full final design completed, we're able to move forward more closely in the same project at the same time. So it seems to be working pretty well. Obviously, anything like that requires some time to shake out the bugs. We've shaped up a number of things. That's another benefit we see from it, is that it will enable us to make better decisions on which is the right thing to work on next, but better understanding the problem. So having an idea that we want to work on retention, and we think that this area is the right place, so we'll go focus on that. Well, now we have, hopefully, we will have had enough time to shape up enough different options that we better understand what could be done in the time frame what we have an appetite to work on that aspect for. So we believe that by working on I can't think of a specific, so our home screen, just for instance, working on the home screen will increase retention by adding this feature. What that can, a little confused on what I was trying to say there. Sorry about that. So we can better understand the options that we have and consider which one is the right thing, as opposed to basing our decision on much more intuition than fact. So now we have more facts. They're still not necessarily data points, but we have more details of what's involved in making one change versus another. And that should give us a much better idea of if we're talking about days or weeks or months that are required to implement some solution that we think affects the area that we want to improve. Excuse me. Let's see. What else do we have? Yes. UI drift. So that is how our actual application, the design or the user interface has actually drifted away from our design document in Figma. So obviously we design it, and we have the iOS design, the Android design, and now the web app design. Over time, because developers, in my opinion, are less likely to see minor differences than design. Obviously, some are better than others. I know that I've had an issue in the past being able to see specific elements that are different. Like sometimes I can't see fonts are different. I can't see colors being different unless it's pointed out. Once it's pointed out, then it's obvious. But for me, it's a lot harder than it is for our designer. And that's kind of the point. That's why they went into design. So over time, because we're trying to move quickly, different elements are appearing different in the application than our design. And we had been trying to say Figma was the source of truth. Problem being that there's one designer and multiple developers. What we are trying now is some different reviews of taking the components. So buttons, for instance. We take all the buttons, and our design document has buttons in it. We still have the overall rough idea of how the design works. But by having those components, we know this type of button should look like this. That type of button should look like that. This heading is this size and this color. By having those bits that we already had, but we looked at the design as opposed to looking at the components design. So there was a bit of a disconnect between development and design in let's make sure that we follow the right component for each element. So what we can do is now take the screenshots of all the buttons and compare them. And we can see, there are different issues. So we're trying to do that more like shaping and less like, here's a problem. This is the immediate fix. Because sometimes it might actually be that these are different because we are thinking about them differently, and potentially so will the user. So is there a different solution that we should consider as opposed to fixing the small change? Now, often it will be just, okay, this is just the wrong font. We changed the font. But perhaps this is a different font because it didn't seem to fit with the component style that we would have assumed it would have because of some other element on the screen near it, or the way the user interacts with it. So that's another element that we're adding into our work is it also empowers anyone in the team to do this. I did one myself, and by taking those screenshots and putting them beside each other, so I took screenshots of multiple elements of the sign-up flow. And by putting those screenshots beside each other, it was much easier to see for myself the drift. So I was on screen 1, and it looked like this. And then I went to screen 2, and this button was smaller, and this font size was different, and they were just... individually, none of them were that much, but overall they add up to something, like significant. So that adds friction for your user. And so that's the idea, is that anyone can go and pick a section of the application and compare it to a relevant section that is different, and compare different elements, check those versus our components, and then we can bring that into somewhat of our shaping up process to better understand, do we just want to fix these problems? Are these just small fixes? Or are they broken because they're a symptom of a deeper underlying issue with our assumptions on how we're going to solve the problem for the user? I think both of those, the shape up elements that we've incorporated, because like I said, we can't do exactly what Basecamp do. Basecamp are a different size than we are. They have different needs and a different business model. So at this point, we're not able to do something like that. Exactly. But it is giving us a lot of opportunity to have better research and materials to make decisions on. Also, it's not just our designer who can shape up things. Anyone in the team can. Because you're not designing the full solution. You're coming up with, well, we need it to be able to do X, Y, Z. To do that, we'll need to be able to connect A, B, and C. That also can be from comparing additional other applications. So we want to be able to see more information about users. Well, there are a bunch of applications out there that we can look at and see what common themes there are, so that it's not alien to the user. You know, there are some things you want to innovate, and there are other things that if you innovate, you will just confuse your user. So we want to make sure that, you know, we make it easy for a user to use any specific component or feature set in the application without having to put a lot of thought into it. Wait, how does this work? What is this supposed to do? Why is it like that? Yeah, so that's where we are. We've almost got the web app done, which I'm really happy with Vue. I'm really happy with the components and how quickly we can build pages. Honestly, some pages that I would have thought would take a few days take a couple of hours. The Azure Serverless Functions, which would be like AWS Lambdas, they're very nice. I really like them as that interface to our API, because I don't know that it would necessarily be the full solution at the moment, but it's very valuable for how we are using it, and I probably will keep transitioning more and more elements that don't need to be in the API over to serverless, and potentially full serverless long term, but there's still a lot to do to make that happen, and there's no desperate need to do it at the moment. Then Shaping Up, get the book. It's free. There are also at least 2 episodes on the Rework podcast, which is a great podcast anyway, by the Basecamp folks. Rework. So there are 2 episodes on Shaping Up, or how they work, in the last 2 or 3 months. I can't remember exactly. Definitely listen to those. There's a couple of YouTube videos on it as well. So whichever way that you like to consume content, which if you're listening to this, I'm assuming you like podcasts. So the Rework podcast with Ryan Singer, and then there's one other after it about how they work, Shaping Up. Very valuable to listen to, but the book is easy to read. There's a PDF, or it's on the web. There are some visuals, so it's very useful to see what that looks like. And our UI drift analysis. I think that's really useful as well, and focusing on the components as opposed to focusing on, is the application matching the design, because the application is moving faster than our design can keep up with. So the apps have to be the source of truth. I think that's it. As always, I love feedback. Email me, podcast@dave-albert.com, or reach out to me on Twitter @Dave_Albert. Thanks for listening.
Until next time, remember, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.